Former New York Congresswoman Nan Hayworth joins me now from Washington. She is a Donald Trump supporter and a surrogate for Oklahoma Attorney General Scott Pruitt, who has been picked to head the EPA. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Vlad. Thanks for having me.
All right, so we've talked a lot about Rex Tillerson, but he isn't the only cabinet pick under scrutiny. Former Texas governor and former GOP rival Rick Perry has been picked for energy secretary. Of course, you remember 5 years ago, he famously could not remember it was on the list of federal agencies he wanted to eliminate. What do you make of this pick?
Governor Perry is a deeply accomplished leader of a great economy in Texas. As you know, Texas added 2.2 million jobs under his tenure, 1.9 million in the private sector. And not only that, but in terms of his role as secretary, one hopes he will become secretary of the Department of Energy. He brings a remarkable record as an energy innovator. He set up a network of wind farms in Texas to feed urban areas with zero carbon clean wind energy. Texas has the largest wind energy industry in the United States. So he has a very solid record as an innovator, as somebody who will respect our all of the above energy economy and the job economy as well. It's a win-win for all of us and for our environment.
So is it your sense then that perhaps this decision to put him up for energy secretary is based on somebody who might be able to change the organization from within?
Well, I think the American public voted for change, as you know, Vlad. And yes, is Governor Perry someone who's obviously has served our nation brilliantly in so many ways, and obviously has been a very accomplished chief executive of the state of Texas? Absolutely. He is a man with a history of leadership and a history of effectiveness, and that's exactly what we need in the Department of Energy. Not an ideologue, but someone who actually understands pragmatically how to balance concern for our energy portfolio, for our energy independence, for our economy and jobs, and for our environment.
All right, let's ask now about Oklahoma Attorney General Scott Pruitt. As you know, he has been picked to lead the Environmental Protection Agency, but he is a climate change skeptic who has sued the EPA, the agency he will now head. You've come out in support of him, and you've said Scott Pruitt is very much in the mold of our nation's first environmental president, Theodore Roosevelt, who was an Republican, Teddy Roosevelt, who understands the critical importance of stewardship. Mr. Pruitt will be a strong partner for the president in effectively balancing protection of America's land, water, air, and wildlife with economic prosperity. But many environmentalists do not share that description of the Attorney General. The Sierra Club has said having Scott Pruitt in charge of the EPA is like putting an arsonist in charge of fighting fires. Why do you think he's in the mold of Teddy Roosevelt?
Well, because Scott Pruitt is actually an outdoorsman among his many other qualifications for this administrator job, but he has actually a more scientific mindset, and I can say that as someone with a background in science, as a physician. He has a more scientific mindset than his critics do. For this reason, he has said that all he seeks to achieve is to have the voice of science fully respected in all aspects as we address the issue of our planet's future and of our climate future. He has not denied that there's climate change, but he has asked that we thoughtfully consider all the arguments and all the evidence. And quite honestly, Vlad, science is never settled. Inherently, it's never settled. It is always under scrutiny. We are always monitoring what happens, taking in new evidence, and drawing conclusions or revising conclusions as indicated. He actually took the best evidence on phosphorus loads. He commissioned a study that got the best data on phosphorus loads for a groundbreaking water rights agreement between Arkansas and Oklahoma, and he engineered that with attention to science.
Well, but Congresswoman, Teddy Roosevelt passed the 1906 Antiquities Act, which put into place this wonderful system that we have of conservation in the United States to protect our lands. The Attorney General has sought to, for example, curb greenhouse emissions. He's tried to stop the curbing of those emissions. He's sought to define which streams and wetlands are subject to federal regulation. It doesn't sound like it's in the mold of Teddy Roosevelt.
Vlad, I would turn that around and say what has happened heretofore, and particularly under the current administration and the current EPA administrator, is that the federal government has far exceeded a useful and practical role and a reasonable role in conserving our natural resources and protecting our environment, and has actually imposed burdens that do not create additional benefits for either our planet or humanity, but in fact impose tremendous costs that actually take resources away from conservation and green energy development. For one example, there's a regulation in the waters of the U.S. Law that the EPA is seeking to impose on the American public and has imposed that will require small businesses to pay $270,000 to get a permit just to have a pond on their land. That's crazy. That's not cost effective. And that is a waste of energy and of resources that should go into actual useful conservation measures. And that's what Attorney General Scott Pruitt represents, and that's what he's done for Oklahoma. He has fought in behalf of clean air and clean water in Oklahoma, including going after polluters in Oklahoma. BP in particular was abusing a regulation that allowed them to collect dollars for contaminating land with oil tanks. Scott Pruitt fought against that. So he is an environmental advocate. He is an advocate for balance and pragmatism and really effective regulation, and that's what he's going to do for us.
Are you concerned, Congresswoman, with the overall makeup of this administration and the large number of oil industry allies and climate change skeptics?
I'm excited to see an administration that understands how actually to do and accomplish the things that we seek for our planet and for our people and for our economy, and want to empower American industry and American innovation and American workers. And all of the picks for the President-elect's cabinet have been men and women of accomplishment and of genuine quality, thoughtful people who understand priorities and understand the role of government and how to empower the greatest nation of free people on the planet to do great things for all of us, including for our world.
Teddy Roosevelt said, "I recognize the right and duty of this generation to develop and use the natural resources of our land, but I do not recognize the right to waste them or to rob by wasteful use the generations that come after us." You think that Attorney General Pruitt will stick to those tenets?
Absolutely, and he has proven that in his actions and in his scrupulous attention not only to the data, as mentioned before, but also to understanding the role of the federal government, the role of the states, and the role of individual Americans, workers, small businesses, and all of our citizens to work together to help everybody prosper and be able to afford to use our resources in the most sensible possible ways, to afford to invest in green energy, to afford to invest in conservation measures. He respects our air and our water, and he and President-elect Trump have pledged to fulfill the mission that was first established by a Republican administration when the Environmental Protection Agency was initiated.
All right, former New York Congresswoman Nan Hayworth, thank you so much for joining me. We appreciate it.
My pleasure, Vlad. Thank you.
All right, for another perspective, we are joined by Sierra Club Executive Director Michael Brune. Michael, thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, Vlad. Thanks for having me on.
All right, you just listened to the Congresswoman's comments. What do you make of these picks for the President-elect's cabinet?
Where should we start? You know, this is so far the picks for cabinet and the people that the President-elect is putting in his transition teams are almost uniformly climate change deniers and people who time and again have taken strong action in favor of polluters and against the public interests. Whether we're talking about EPA or energy, Secretary of State, or the people on transition at NASA. A lot of these folks have a very long and very strong track record of siding on behalf of polluters.
So Mr. Pruitt has said scientists continue to disagree about the degree and extent of global warming and its connection to the actions of mankind. He wrote that in the National Review earlier this year. He went on to say the debate should be encouraged in classrooms, public forums, and the halls of Congress. It should not be silenced with threats of prosecution. Dissent is not a crime. But the majority of scientists do believe that there is an effect of greenhouse gases on our climate.
Yeah, this issue wasn't a debate, really, in serious circles until President-elect Trump was elected. What we have right now is very clear evidence.
There have been debates, right, Michael? Or, I mean, it's not every scientist who believes this, but the majority, let's say.
It is just about every scientist who has put forward a peer-reviewed paper has come out very clearly, unequivocally, saying that climate change is real, that it's serious, that it is caused by humans, and that humans need to react to that. There is no serious debate that is happening right now about whether this is happening. And you can just go outside and you can observe the fact that we are seeing more extreme weather events across the United States, the drought in Tennessee, the droughts in California. The things that have been happening across the U.S. and around the world give evidence to the fact that climate change is real and that we have an obligation to act on it.
How interesting did you find it that she referenced Teddy Roosevelt, our president, who in the early 20th century set aside these federal lands? He recognized the value of them to us as a nation. When we know that the president-elect has criticized, he's called global warming a hoax, he's vowed to cancel the Paris Accord, and he's talked about President Obama's quote-unquote war on coal. How do you juxtapose that with the idea of comparing the Attorney General Pruitt to Teddy Roosevelt?
There's no connection other than people are trying to put them in the same sentence. Let's talk about Scott Pruitt. As Attorney General in Oklahoma, he fought against safeguards that would limit the amount of soot that comes from coal-fired power plants. He also fought against the amount of soot that's being emitted from polluters in the state of Oklahoma. He fought against mercury poisoning, which is one of the most potent forms of brain poison that affects young children. He even fought against reducing the amount of air pollution in our national parks. And on every one of those cases, he lost. Many of them in conservative courts, they found that his evidence was not persuasive. He has also argued against the Clean Power Plan and has organized other attorneys general across the U.S. against the Clean Power Plan, which would gradually replace coal, which is the dirtiest form of how electricity is produced. It would replace coal with clean, renewable energy and create more jobs in the process and often save consumers money in the process. So there's a long track record on very specific issues where Scott Pruitt has sided with polluters, and more generally, he has worked to undermine the agency that now he would be appointed to lead, and he has fought regulations that he would be required by law to enforce. It's the wrong pick, and we can't have him be confirmed.
Let me ask you one last question about Attorney General Pruitt. He has said that he is not a tool of the oil and gas industry. He has talked a lot about protecting the rights of Oklahoma. And in a statement to the New York Times back in 2014, he said it is the job of the Attorney General to defend the interests and well-being of the citizens in the state of Oklahoma. This includes protecting Oklahoma's economy from the perilous effects of federal overreach by agencies like the EPA. The energy sector is a major driver of the Oklahoma economy. Your reaction to that?
Look, over the last few years, we have been replacing coal plants with clean energy, with mostly wind power in the state of Oklahoma. And when we do that, we're creating more jobs, we're cutting air and water pollution, and we're saving ratepayers money because wind is cheaper than coal, and in many cases, cheaper than gas throughout that entire region. So if Scott Pruitt believes that his job is to protect both the health and the economy of the people of Oklahoma, he has failed at that job, and he would fail as the administrator of the EPA. He should not be confirmed by the Senate, and the Sierra Club is going to do everything that we can to make sure that his appointment is rejected.
Michael, let me ask you now about the president-elect's pick to be Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson. Should his experience with an oil company be a factor in his confirmation if he's going to be Secretary of State, which obviously, as you know, is more of a diplomatic and a foreign policy-related post?
Well, his experience as an oil executive is the only experience that he's had. He's worked for Exxon his entire life. He's never had another job. So if you look at Exxon's track record, particularly in Africa and in developing countries around the world, say in Chad or in Iraq, in Indonesia, even here in the United States, Exxon, under Rex Tillerson's leadership, has a very long track record of manufacturing confusion around climate change, devoting millions of dollars to lobbying against climate change and creating more skepticism about climate change. They have trampled human rights with countries that they've operated in Africa and the Middle East, and they have a long track record of opposing safeguards that would protect our air and water. Are those the skills that we're looking for in America's top diplomat? Should we be giving control of our foreign policy to an oil CEO? I think not. I think that the American people deserve better, and I hope that all of this information comes out in the confirmation hearings in a couple weeks.
When I was a foreign correspondent responsible for covering West Africa, I had an opportunity to visit the Niger River Delta in Nigeria, where I saw the damage from drilling in those areas. The people there were essentially denied their right to be able to fish and to farm because oil had polluted entirely their lands. I wonder if the Secretary of State is meant to go out and enforce, or at least try to promote human rights in countries not just simply in Africa but around the world, how that past experience as an oil executive is going to play out.
Well, it's tough to see, right? Because his experience in many cases has been to suppress human rights and to suppress civil society that is looking to increase prosperity but also to protect natural resources. You know, Terry Lynn Carl is a professor at Stanford University, and she's the person who first coined the term a resource curse, which is that in Nigeria, in many countries in Africa and South Asia, and in many cases for countries around the world, those countries that have low democratic values and a large amount of oil in particular and other resources tend to fare the worst, because the resources that come in to the government from oil revenues are devoted more towards tanks and bombs and guns rather than schools and public services. And this is true in many cases where Exxon has operated. So do these experiences, because Rex Tillerson has visited other countries and has developed relationships with dictators and autocrats, does that qualify him to be the best diplomat? Of course not. Of course not. What we need to do is we need to see who are the best people who would advance American values and who would advance American interests, not just the interests of the oil industry.
Michael Brune, we thank you so much. Thank you really for stopping by. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Vlad. Take care.
Take care.